We've just heard a bit from Deans Robbins and Rubin about the kind of mediation that writers of all kinds, we've focused especially on critics and journalists today, but we'll hear from a variety from people who write in a variety of ways for different contexts. But so we've heard a little bit about the role that writers play in mediating between the design professions, including architecture, and the public, or rather the many sub-publics that make up our public sphere. In 2 sessions this afternoon, we're going to hear reports from and comments on that relationship and that practice. In the first session, we'll hear some of these ideas from 5 speakers in a trajectory running in a rather zigzag fashion from east to west, from Syracuse, from Washington, D.C., Minneapolis, Phoenix, and Los Angeles. In the second session, we'll come back home. So from in and out of the academy, our 5 panelists in this first session are writing about architecture and the city in books, in professional journals, in popular magazines, in daily newspapers, blogs, and sometimes not even writing, but talking on the radio or on television to their audiences. The people we're going to hear from, you know from your programs, but in reverse order, and I'll introduce each one before his or her presentation, are Christopher Hawthorne of the Los Angeles Times, Nan Ellen, here from Arizona State University's School of Public Affairs, Janet Abrams from the University of Minnesota Design Institute, Jonathan Capehart from the Washington Post, and to start us off, Sean Kirst from the Post Standard. A few words about him before I hand over the microphone. Sean Kirst, born into a factory family in a Lake Erie steel town, confesses to being just old enough to remember the heyday of the great upstate downtowns along Salina Street in Syracuse and elsewhere in our neighboring cities. He reports spending his childhood conscious of adult conversations about gradual civic decline, something we heard about last night as well from Saskia Sassen. Now, looking at an upstate landscape in which cities are still struggling to revive those downtown cores, Kirst speaks and writes in the Post Standard, in his column, both of the shared mistakes he sees and the many reasons he stays, the reasons for optimism. And I think if Kirst's special role at the Post Standard is and has been holding Syracuse accountable to the aspirations and the potential of its people, closely scrutinizing, your comments notwithstanding, closely scrutinizing the public and private decisions about the city's future. So, Sean, thank you for coming today. Sean's talk is titled, Understanding Used to Be, A Lifetime in Upstate Downtowns.
I thought I'd start this, Dean Rubin. This will make you happy because it's another story we haven't written, so it'll give you something else to talk about. But I thought I'd start by saying, especially to our friends from California, this is the birthplace of Irving Gill. Irving Gill was born in Tully in a incredibly beautiful part of Onondaga County. Came into Syracuse, had no classical training, went to high school here. Went to Chicago to join a guy named Joseph Silsby, who built the Syracuse Savings Bank, and worked with both Wright and Sullivan there, and then ended up in California where he became one of the seminal and great American architects. And in the way these things go in terms of not knowing our own story as a city, he's forgotten. One of the great American architects born here, and we don't talk about him. I wrote a column yesterday where I talked about being a pair of brown shoes on a black tuxedo. That's very much how I feel with all of you. I am no classical architectural student. I only write from the gut. So this is a great honor to be on this panel, and I appreciate the invitation. What I will do is I will come here as an emissary of the people born and raised upstate. That will demand a little bit of biography. And here's my deal with biography. I hope this works. It seems to work as a columnist. That I think biography is a little bit like when you're on an elevator and somebody shows you a baby picture, especially if it's an ugly baby, and the way you react, right? The issue with this is that if I hold this wallet open and show you a photograph, I am hoping you see your reflection, and if you don't, then go get some coffee. But thank you. Much better. This is just very quickly. My parents were Buffalonians. My father grew up in Father Baker's Orphanage, which is an epic piece of architecture. You see it from 10 miles away when you're coming into Buffalo, a great basilica. My mother was of Scotch immigrants. Her parents were gone by the time she was 3. She was raised by her sister, a longshoreman family. They were working people in Buffalo during the great days. Mr. Campbell and I talked about that a little bit. And really, Buffalo was their America. They were new Americans, in a sense, and fell very much in love with the city. And by the 1950s, it was starting to go. You can even argue that during the Depression, it was starting to go, really, that the war provided sort of temporary respite for, since the rest of the world's industry was ravaged. But as a child, I remember vividly being in the kitchen. My father moved to Dunkirk, New York, a small steel town on Lake Erie. And I remember being in the kitchen and when those fumes of coffee and cigarettes, and my parents sitting at the table and constantly talking about used to be, wondering what had happened to Dunkirk's downtown, wondering what had happened to Buffalo's downtown, where in the early years of my childhood you would drive in to see the Electric Building and to see these great works of architecture in downtown illuminated for the holidays, and just this profound and powerful sense of loss about who's leaving the garbage along our roads, what's happened, why are people moving, what's gone wrong. And as a child, there are reporters and there are columnists and there are critics, and I knew I would be a columnist because when I was 11 years old, I had something to say, like, what the hell's going on upstate, right? So let me tell you a quick story about Dunkirk, New York. Dunkirk, New York, population 20,000 in 1960. They decide Route 5 runs through the city. They put a throughway exit on the outskirts of town, railroad town. Buffalo to Chicago. New York Central is gone by 1963, and they decide downtown starts to go to hell, right? So they decide, what are we going to do? Well, of course, what do you do when your downtown starts to go to hell? You take urban renewal money, you level the middle of the city, you bomb it out, and then you build a mall, right? That's the answer, you build a mall. Except the problem in Dunkirk was they leveled the middle of the city, ran out of money. Sears said there's no reason for us to come to Dunkirk, and they never built them all. So if you go to Dunkirk, New York today, which is where my folks are buried and where I still go back, the city is like a ring of old buildings around this great bombed out area that was never built. And so I thought, man, that's Dunkirk development. What a mistake we made in Dunkirk, right? What a mistake we made in Dunkirk. Except then I go to grad school in Erie, Pennsylvania. In Erie, Pennsylvania, if you don't know this, Erie, Pennsylvania got it in a trade with New York State. It's actually an upstate city. It's right on Lake Erie. If you look on the map, you can see the little lip that comes around. Erie is an upstate city, except they couldn't call it Erie County then because Buffalo got that. But I go to Erie, Pennsylvania, and I live in an apartment across the street from a downtown mall. The problem with this mall is that it was empty. It was incredible in kind of a romantic, poetic way, because you could go in there and walk around in your footsteps. You know, it was great in that sense. But it was dead. It was already dead. This mall that I'm sure they thought was going to save their downtown failed, okay? So in the meantime, from there, I go to Niagara Falls, New York. Now, Niagara Falls is it's just the gold standard for failed upstate cities because let's talk about this for a second, right? What do we all want? Mark, what do we all want? We want tourism, right, Mark? That's going to save all these upstate cities. We're going to rebuild the Erie Canal, and everybody's going to come upstate for tourism. Well, Niagara Falls, New York gets millions of tourists every year, right? It's millions of tourists every year, and what's the problem there? Well, the South End, downtown, doesn't work. So you know what they do in Niagara Falls, near this, a natural attraction that I swear to God is like the voice of God. If you're a runner and you go to Niagara Falls, get up at dawn and run on Goat Island, because at dawn the mist comes up, there is no human voice, that falls roars, and you have it to yourself, and you remember what that thing is. But in Niagara Falls, they decide they're going to build a mall. So what they do is they level the old commercial areas downtown. All these attractions go across the river. All that honky-tonk tic-tac in Niagara Falls, Ontario, that people actually used to be in Niagara Falls, New York. But that's gone now because they leveled it and they put up a mall that the last I knew would become a discount mall, which is the great American solution to failed malls, which then fail themselves, and eventually you knock it down, right? So that's Niagara Falls. So I also lived in Rochester, where Rochester actually had a little bit of a clue. A guy named Victor Gruen in the 1950s built a downtown mall that functioned for about 20 years. It actually had something to it, but just they're knocking it down this year. That's going to go, and there's some sadness involved with that. But I then come to Syracuse, where, let me segue for a second. There was a great writer, journalist named Bernard Fall, who was a master's student at Syracuse University. He was a prophet about Vietnam. He went to Vietnam in the 1950s and early 60s, and he said, we will not defeat the insurgency there. He watched what happened to France, and he said the United States cannot overcome that insurgency, right? And he's got this one passage in this one wonderful book where he talks about seeing the American military in 1965. And there's, they're landing all their boats and the choppers going up and all. And he thinks, man, maybe they can win this war, but if they do it, we're going to lose Vietnam, right? That's an observation he makes. Well, I come to Syracuse, where our answer has again become a mall, but not just any mall. We're talking about a billion dollar enclosure. And as a journalist, my question is, if we win the war with this mall, do we lose our city? That's the issue. We've got to find a way that if we're going to build this thing, to make it work, make it mesh with the city. And right now in Syracuse, that is not really an acceptable line of conversation, because if you bring that up, like, wait a minute, what about the North Side? The North Side, birthplace of the Six Nations, the Tree of Peace planted by our lake, one of the most historic places in the United States. That's what we're talking about. But if you talk about how is this thing going to mesh with the city, you're an obstructionist. That's where we're at upstate. Now, just to, I suppose I should use my notes, shouldn't I? Let me tell you this, it seems to me the problem in these upstate cities is not trying to figure out what we want to be, it is remembering who we are. When I wrote a column, last Christmas I wrote a column, the median age in Onondaga County now, 36.4. 36.4, what struck me when I read that is people no longer remember, not most people in Onondaga County, what it was like to go downtown for Christmas and why they would go downtown and what an irreplaceable experience that was. It ain't the same going to a mall. So I wrote a column about that, and I just talked about the downtown Christmases, and I got an overwhelming response from readers. People just hungry and longing for this used to be. And it really seems, it comes back as a columnist, I'm not here to write about architecture, I'm here to write about that longing. You're the folks who know about architecture, you're the folks maybe who know how to solve the problem. I'm just here to write about that longing. But so my job as a columnist, I wrote a column a year or two ago about how, what really ticks off ambulance companies now? People don't move for ambulances, right? And you say, is that a manifestation of a cold culture of people? Well, no, it's not. It's a manifestation of people climbing into SUVs where everything is cushioned and soundproof, and they got their cell phone, and they got their earphones, and they don't want to know nothing about what's going on outside that SUV. My job as a columnist is to make them want to know and make them feel something, whether they like it or not. And what I find is when I write about the city and I write about downtown and I write about community, that people, whether they want to admit it or not, they want it. They still want it. That's why 15,000 people come downtown for the Christmas tree lighting. That's why thousands of people come downtown to ice skate at Clinton Square. That's why thousands of people go to Syracuse University games and park in the Bricks, which is one of the first public housing projects in the United States, Pioneer Homes, neighbor of the Bricks. They park there and walk up, and they aren't afraid. They aren't afraid till they get home and start talking about all the things to be afraid of. The great joke in Syracuse is, two problems in Syracuse, right? Downtown is dead and there's no place to park. But, anyways, none of this is to, let me tell you one other quick story. Here's my favorite one. And this is in terms of remembering what you know and who you are and what it means, right? Let me tell you this. You know what, and this is going to be hard news for some of you to understand or some of you to appreciate, especially the people who live here, so brace yourself. Syracuse is the snowiest big city in the United States. Get a lot of snow here. Last year, we were the snowiest big city in North America. Snowiest big city in North America. Now, you can't take that one of two ways, right? Let me tell you, when I'll write about it, invariably, I'll get calls from people. What do you want to put that in the paper for? What are you putting that in the... No one's going to come here if you say that. Like, you know, Bill Gates is going to come here in some summer and put in a complex with 20,000 jobs, and he's going to get up in October and say, damn it, it snows in Syracuse. You know? It's who we are. We're the snowiest big city in the United States. You know what the snowiest big city in Canada is? Well, Quebec City. Quebec City. Now, when I say those words to you, what do you think of? You think of evocative, glittering, French-speaking, beautiful city. What do you think? You know? And they're snowy. They get tons of snow. Nobody moves away because of the snow. What the hell's the matter with us? So, anyways, when it comes back to design, when it comes back to architecture, this is my point. Every piece of evidence of civic desolation feeds the sickness I'm talking about. We've got a civic sickness, a psychology we've got to cure. So if every piece of architecture is only an example. We got a million problems. We got kids killing each other a half mile from here, right? We got major problems. But we are fighting a sense of desolation. So the importance of what we do architecturally in this town is staggering. And a building that works does not work if the payback is desolation down the street, because that desolation only feeds the same sense. Anyway, if I don't address those realities as a journalist, if I don't address those realities as a columnist, then I am being derelict both to my family and to my readership and to all the people I'm trying to reach. So thank you.
It's always good to get a bit of that old-time religion at the start of an afternoon. Thank you, Sean. That was magnificent. I think I speak for everybody in saying that.